got to record on two spots. I'm having an iPad problem. We're going to see if we can do both. So before we got into this week, remember we talked about how this builds, right? And 3, 4, and 5, weeks 3, 4, and 5 are part A, part B, part C, the way I see it. Well, I wanted to segue from last week to this week before we kind of get into it. We talked about last week how we think we know what's good for us and we don't. And if we're honest with ourselves, we know that that's true. Well, think back to week 1 when I started off with telling you why I got into this process. When I was going through all the chronic pain and I was going through the no sleep and I was going through the constant fight or flight with my nervous system, I thought it was the worst thing ever. I was obsessed with it. I researched, I went to every doctor that exists. It consumed my life, for lack of a better term. I was addicted to it like a drug. And it was a bad thing, an awful thing, a terrible thing, okay? Fast forward now, 12 years later, it's the best thing that ever happened to me. I would never trade it. I wouldn't be standing here before you talking about this if that didn't happen to me. I wouldn't be, not that I'm a great or by any stretch of the imagination perfect father, but I am a better father, better husband, better worker, better Christian. So I'm thankful for that more than anything on the planet, and I wouldn't change it for anything. So I go back to, we don't know what's good for us in the moment. So the thoughts that are telling us to judge it, those are just thoughts. They're just a suggestion box, okay? So I thought we would segue that with what we get into today. So what we're talking about today is tying it all together a little bit. That's what we've been talking about for the last 2 weeks. We're going to talk about a couple verses that we're very, very familiar with, and I'm going to try to get you to see them maybe in a different light. So I always want to start off with the disclaimers. This is a mental health video, so it's informational and presentation only. If you need, if you have any life-threatening situation, please seek professional help. And also, the goal is to put this on YouTube, like we have every week. And so up here on these sites, if you haven't known that yet, Matthew on Monday he links it to the YouTube video and then puts up the PDF presentation. And then I put this up on Sunday afternoon on the YouTube channel. So just because it builds, and I know people are in and out in the summer. All right, so love your neighbor as yourself. The second commandment that we're all very familiar with. So does it stick out to you, like it does to me, that Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself? As yourself. Many people associate that to mean you must love your neighbor, you must love yourself too. And that's not wrong. However, what if there's more to it? So how can you love someone else as yourself unless you see them as yourself? What if as yourself means because they are the same as you? Wouldn't this explain how we're all made in God's image? We're all made in God's image. How else do you explain that? We tend to make it think, oh, well, it means that, we're the most, educated, tech-savvy, advanced form on this planet above the animals and such. But does that really explain it? We're all made in God's image. Isn't it more than that? Doesn't it mean somewhere down deep we're all the same because we're all God's image? And what's that deep part of us? It's our spirit. It's our awareness, consciousness, breath that God gave us. That's the same as everyone else's. So how do we realize this so that we can follow Jesus' second most important commandment. So remember from week 4 that ultimately every thought that upsets us is because we are questioning our own worthiness. We may have to become aware and trace back 15 thoughts. But if you get there, you will find that that issue of questioning your worthiness is what caused you to be upset. And here's what's the rest of it. This is true for everyone. I don't care their race, gender, sexual orientation, identity crisis or not, Enneagram type, personal history, education, career level. I don't care. That same process is the same for them. Now, while this may seem negative, it is not, because it unites us. We all have the same problem. Thoughts that we're believing as the gospel truth. So why are we this way? Well, remember from weeks 2 to 4 that ever since the fall, our minds have become conditioned to only care about functioning in this world, this temporary world, thinking we have to control everything or else nothing will get done. We all inherit this when we're born here and then learn it. This blocks us from trusting God and feeling God every moment. So again, while this seems negative, realizing that we have the same fundamental mechanics, issue, structure, whatever word you want to use, actually connects us in a very, very deep way. So like everything we've done in this class, just learning this intellectually is the first step, but it's not going to do anything if you don't take it further. So you must challenge your own thoughts to see if this is true for you. Now, it's usually easier to recognize dysfunction in someone else than yourself, isn't it? I believe that's why Jesus said, quit looking at your brother and see the log in your own eye, right? But I do encourage you here, because it's going to be easier to see it in someone else. I do encourage you here to start looking around and watching. Be present. Watch people. What you're going to see is that they're suffering like you. They have the same fundamental issue you do. Again, and like I talked about last week, the suffering's not obvious for most of us. Most of us, there's times where it's obvious because we're going through things and you just can't hide it. But most of the time, it's just what we call a background of discontent. There's just always that background of it's just something. It just don't feel right. That's what I mean when I say suffering. Then there's times of obvious suffering where you can't hide it anymore. So they have the same fundamental issue you do. And again, that seems negative, but it's not. It's connecting and it can be freeing, as we will discuss later. After you see it in others, then set the intention to see the log in your own eye. During your mindfulness practice, and especially your meditation, see if you notice and catch thoughts judging yourself as worthy or not. When you recognize this, it will be an aha moment. And what's amazing about this is as you've seen it in other people, and now you see it in yourself, you may for the first time feel a connection to other human beings that you don't even know that you never have before. So because of this same fundamental issue, we will all identify with certain things. And this is where the differences come in. This is why we can't see it, okay? Unless we go underneath. We got to go deeper. So we all establish these roles and identities. So let's talk about those. So we identify with things we think will make us worthy to cover that feeling of unworthiness underneath, which is really why you have that background of discontent. It's that feeling of unworthiness that never really leaves you. Those things are different to different people. Why? Because of different thoughts and conditioning from the past that we believe that leads us to those identities. Now, let's name some common things that these can be. And I can be just as guilty of these as you. I work through this process constantly. This can be our career, our sports team, things we excel at, being this or that type of person, things we consider good or bad. It can be things such as being a parent, a mature adult, a fit person, a party person, a tell it like it is person, a person everyone likes. All of these things are roles and identities that we identify with, and we become addicted to try to cover up that background of discontent based on unworthiness, based on conditioning. Now, this slide may be hard for you because there's times when we're tied to these things, they matter to us. We're so tied to them, we're so addicted to them. I've been there a lot. But keep going underneath the mental noise and you will find it's true. Now, let me ask you this. Can being a parent, great at your job, your sports team winning it all, yes, being this type or that type of person, can that save you?
No.
The answer is no. There will be good times with it, and there will be bad times with it. There will be times you're good at your job. There will be times you're bad at your job. There will be times you were good as a parent. There will be times you're bad as a parent. There will be times that your sports team wins it all, and then there will be years they don't even make the playoffs. There will be times that you are feeling good about how you live your life, your character, and then there'll be times where you're like, man, I'm a bad person. What comes up must go down in this world. So, I can hear you. You say, hey, but being a parent and keeping my job matters in this life. Yes, it does. But the question on the table right now is, does it make you worthy? Because remember, your background of discontent, what's really making you miserable underneath it all is your feeling of unworthiness. So the question is, does it make you worthy? And the answer is no. Only God made you worthy. Ephesians 2, 8, 9, among a lot of other places. God never changes. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Your situation as a parent and a worker will change. It has to go up and come down. You succeed and then you fail. That's how it's supposed to be. Because it's temporary, and in the end, it ain't what matters. Now, why? Why does this happen? To make you lean on God. To make you fully submit to God. Now, if this makes you uncomfortable, that was last week's lesson. I do encourage you to go back to that. So, how do we reconcile this contradiction, which is what it is, of having to do these jobs of parent, career, whatever, yet not become identified with it and not base our worthiness on it? There's the question. You guessed it. Mindfulness is the only way to start getting you towards it. Because the thing that's making you think it determines your worthiness, and that you've got to do it more and perfect and identify with these roles, is thoughts. Previous conditioned thoughts. So you must challenge those thoughts. Again, go back to the little diagram I kind of like to give you when we first started. Here, this is the thoughts and this is you. There is no separation. And as you start doing this process, it starts doing this. And as you start gaining a little space and a little distance from it, then you can start seeing it. So go back and revisit week 2. So how should we see these activities that we have to do while we're here? As functions that we feel. Not identities and not roles. They are necessary functions, but are not who you are. You were born into this world with one thing and one thing only, and you'll only leave with that one thing. That's your God-given spirit. Nothing else. Everything else is therefore temporary and not who you are by definition, since it's temporary. Now it's here to allow us to do these functions that God has given us temporarily. So, when you see your personality, things you do, things you like, as part of yourself, you base your worthiness on the outcome. And by definition, everything in this world must be up and down because it's finite and temporary. Therefore, you're basing your worthiness on things that must disappoint you by definition. And then we wonder why we have a background of discontent all the time. So as I've said in the previous 2 weeks, again, this is normal. Everyone's doing it, and it's insane. We are not aware that we're doing it because no one is consciously insane. If we make it conscious, it's the end to the insanity because no one chooses insanity. So, we identify with these roles because we think it makes us special or worthy in other people's eyes. And then that makes us worthy in our own eyes. Be honest with yourself. Listen to your thoughts.
We can't please everybody, or we can't please ourselves?
Not only can you not please everybody, deep down, you can't really please anybody.
I believe that.
But the goal here is, why are we trying?
Okay.
Now, if you're honest and you observe these thoughts, you're going to see that's true. You're judging yourself through everybody else's eyes, or what you think is going on in their head. And guess what's going on in their head? They think you are judging them through your head. Okay? But again, that ties us together because we're all the same. The structure is the same. So when we separate from and challenge these thoughts, then we will see in others and ourselves that this is true. But then we get to start having the freedom to choose. That's what this is all about. We can choose to quit believing these roles have anything to do with our worthiness and feel God is that unchanging source, because we're the image of God, underneath it all. Which then, ironically, connects us to all the other people that we're seeking connection with, so that we can love our neighbor as ourselves as we were naturally intended. So we're going to come back to that in a second. Because the question that I have, that I'm sure you have right now is, well, if I don't identify with these things, I'm not going to be good at anything. I'm not going to do anything well. It's a good question. So will my effect as a parent or worker suffer? Ironically, it gets better when you see it as a function and not an identity that you're staking your worthiness on it. How? Let's go further with that. How does that happen? Well, when you find you're the same underneath the mental noise as other people, and the only way you find that is you have realizations when you see your own thoughts. Well, that includes your kids, your coworkers, all these things. The two that I talk a lot about are parent and your job, because a lot of us in this room are adults, and those are the two things that a lot of us identify with because it's so built into us. You actually will relate to them in a new, deeper way. You will feel them instead of just thinking you know about them, because you're present with them more. You'll be a better parent and worker because of this. Also, when you play a role, think about it. You're like an actor on stage. You're not being real. So, but just because you lose identification with the things you do, that doesn't mean you do not try your best. You absolutely do your best because that function matters and there's scripture to prove it while you were doing it. The difference is, here's the huge difference. And this is why I always said week 4 was my favorite. The difference is you give the outcome over to God instead of thinking you must control it. You just do the function. Be present, do it to the best of your ability, and then you give it over. That's so freeing. That's where you don't make it based on your worthiness, and that's where the stress comes from, the outcome. If you're really paying attention to your thoughts, when you're doing these activities, you're not present with the activity. You're judging yourself in the future to see, did I do this right? Did I do this perfectly? So you're not present with what you're doing in that moment. You may be having a conversation with your child, and you're sitting there thinking, man, are they going to be a good adult? Are they going to mess up when they're out on their own? And all these things, you're not present with them. You're thinking about the outcome, and you're trying to control it. You're not giving it to God. There's where the stress is. And that means you're based on your worthiness. It all comes back to being present. So, last bullet. Being present and mindful allows you to focus completely on what you are doing while you were doing it. So when you were working, or when you're being a parent, or when you're cheering on your sports team, or watching your favorite band in concert, you give it your full attention and enjoy it more. By giving it your full attention, you will do your best automatically. That's what's awesome about it. Then you let it be. And that's the key. And that's the hard part. Whatever happens, happens. And know that it is God's will. Why is it God's will? Because it happened. Is God in control or not? As we looked at last week, and that's the hard part. Now, you can live with any result if you get to a certain point because you know you did your best and then you turned it over. The joy is in the act, not the outcome. That's what you're trying to get to. So, back to love your neighbor as yourself. The issue and the fix is the same for all of us, even though our chosen identities and roles are different because of all the different conditioning and how we grew up and who we were around. This is because we are all made in the image of God underneath it all. I'm going to say here the words that help me, that may help you, are content and structure. So what changes is content for all of us. What's the same is the structure. So what I mean by that is the content is going to come and go at different phases of your life too. Your content could be, as a teenager, it's going to be really in a entering college age kid. It's really going to be a lot about social. Who am I friends with? Who am I not? Do they think I'm cool? Do they not? All that stuff that goes on in your head. Why? Because that's the conditioning that you're in. So you're believing those thoughts that tell you, unless so-and-so likes me or so-and-so thinks I'm cool or I'm popular with so-and-so, I'm not worthy. That content will change as you become an adult. It'll still be other people, but it'll be my boss, or it will be that person that I had that meeting with today, or it will be, your child. Okay, or it can be simple things. Think about it. There's little things that upset you, isn't there? We call them little things. It can be the door broke again. I got to fix the door. The dishwasher's messed up. I got to get a new dishwasher. It can be whatever. All the little things. And so the content just changes constantly. The structure is the same and never changes. The structure is the conditioning that we learned that taught us to automatically believe thoughts that come into our head as the gospel truth and not have the ability to question them and not have a choice. That's the structure. And that's what we all do. Does that help you understand what I mean when I say content and structure? The structure never changes. The content comes and goes. There's always going to be another thought. There's always going to be something. Always. Why? Because it's supposed to be that way in this world. That's how it's built. So there's always going to be another thought. When Adam and Eve was in the Garden of Eden and they were just cruising along before the devil came and put these thoughts in their head, they were just presence of God, enjoying the garden. Maybe that's how we were meant to be. And ever since that position, we've been conditioned to believe these thoughts and keep going and function in this world and make this world. So, bullet 2. Once you realize this for yourself, you will realize the deeper meaning of love your neighbor as yourself. You can only love something as yourself if you see it as yourself. Everything in this world is the same. Everyone in this world is the same underneath. Even the bad people and the good people. It just manifests differently. Good people are covering pretending better. Now, I do want to add a point here. There are things that are wrong. Remember what we talked about in week 1. What was our definition of mindfulness? Awareness of real life right now. What did we say was real life and what did we say was not? All that stuff happening in your head If it doesn't become a thing in your heart and become an act, it's not real. It's just in your head. Your mind's just doing what it's supposed to do. It's throwing out suggestions to try to keep you alive and make you better at being alive in this world. It doesn't care about the next one. And so it's just doing what it's supposed to do. When it becomes your heart and then becomes an act, that's real life. And that's when it's wrong. And there are things that are wrong. And that's what we're trying to stop. So when I say even the good people and even the bad people, I mean the structure. The structure's the same underneath it. They just couldn't get a grasp of it. Maybe their conditioning was very intense and they did that thing. So that's how we can love the bad people too. We're the same as them underneath it all. We just are covering it better currently. Now the goal is to learn to catch the thoughts and have a choice as to whether that thought is true or not. And that never, ever can become your heart and never become an act. That's the goal. So keep being mindful. Go within. Challenge your thoughts. Remove the block and find God again. That's the only way to see your neighbor as yourself, which is the ultimate love. I'm going to stop here and ask you one thing and try to bring this home to the parents. Why do we love our kids so much? Answer this for me. Let's be honest. We love people in this world, not like we love our kids sometimes. Why? Answer for me, parents.
They're an extension of myself.
What she said.
They're an extension of yourself. If we're going to be honest, we can't really love anything unless we see it as ourselves. You can have a deep love with it. That, I'm not a Greek person to understand all the Greek, but I've been in church enough to know that they have the different words for love, and the God love is the big one. and the only way that you can do that is when you see it as yourself. You can have a fundamental appreciation for other things and other people, but it's going to be more surface level. To take that full connection as yourself, you've almost got to see them as an extension of yourself. That's why I keep going to, we're all the same underneath it. Even that person you hate, even that person that caused you so much pain. Structure is the same. Now, again, they did, and here's the part that's hard too. We all do the best we currently can at that time. We just gotta unlearn better. So, one summary, and then I'm going to talk about something at the end. So there is more to loving your neighbor as yourself than we think. Being made in God's image means we were and are the same as everyone originally. We all learn the same conditioning and therefore have the same root issue cause for our feelings of unworthiness. While this appears negative, this actually connects us in a very deep way. And the reason, stop here for a second, the reason is because if we can quit judging ourselves and quit judging as better or worse than other people, that's the key thought. When you can catch that thought, you're trying to make yourself better than other people, or you're trying to catch up with the other people. When you can catch that one and quit making it a competition, that's the key. Because if we're going to be honest, go back to what I said, we're basing our worthiness on how we think other people view us or are seeing us, with what that means is thinking about us. What we're doing is comparing. It's a game. It's a competition. Who wins? But if you can catch that thought as it's happening, it will be the biggest aha moment for you. You know it's happening. You just know it right now. There's no way you can deny it. But you have to catch it in the act. Like catch it with its hand in the cookie jar, so to speak. And when you catch it, that will be the biggest aha moment for you. And then you keep catching it. Now, we do not recognize this, and so we identify with certain things or roles that we believe will finally make us worthy and take away that background of discontent that we've had most of our lives. These roles and identities are temporary, therefore must be up and must be down, which means they cannot make us worthy. And by definition, there are going to be times they make us miserable. We're scared that if we let go, we will not be proficient at these things, which is actually the opposite of the truth, because we're believing more lies in our head that's based on previous conditioning. When we see that we are the same underneath, this includes everyone and actually makes us better at these functions we do. Now, being mindful makes you better at what you're doing as well, because you are focused, you give it your full attention, and it will cause you to do your best. Here's what I'll add one thing here. I encourage you to try this week. When you're working on something, do your best to slow down for a second while you're doing it and pay attention. Just try to step back for a second from the thoughts and see what your thoughts are saying. Are they saying, I need to put this here and put that here? Well, that's what your mind's supposed to do. that's great. But if you pay attention, it'll probably get to a point where it's saying, I got to present this at that meeting, and I hope they like it, and I hope I'm doing it right. If I'm not, they're going to think I'm not good at my job, and that means I'm unworthy. So why it's stressful while you're doing it. That's why you go home so tired, and your mind is like, because all day long you've been judging yourself as worthy or not based on what you did all day, as opposed to just doing it. So that's where that mindfulness and that separation, you keep doing this, and it's a back and forth. You're not going to solve it. You want to lessen it. So being mindful and challenging thoughts that tell you that you must control the outcome of these roles and identities are actually what's making you miserable. It's not what you're doing. And there's a lot of days I do a lot of formulas and codes and stuff in Excel, and I'm going to put up together these things and show these people all this stuff and all that. And doing those things is not a problem. But it's, am I judging myself as doing it good or bad? And as I'm judging myself, well, what if I don't do it right, or I don't present it right, what are they going to think of me? That's what stresses me out. So letting the results be up to God, and knowing that whatever happens after you have done your best is God's will, is so freeing. Then and only then will you understand what Jesus meant by loving your neighbor as yourself. Because ultimately and deep down, here's what I've been driving at. You are your neighbor. Now, next week, we are going to talk about how to go forward with this in our lives. Next week is going to model more week 1 and 2 than 3, 4, and 5. It's going to be very technical. I guess I'll come back to that word. It'll be very content heavy with, we're going to do this and do that, and or so on, and some ideas to throw out. So with that, one thing, what time is it?
9:37.
Okay, perfect. One thing I wanted to throw out, I've had a couple people come to me and say, since this was a 6-week class, the people that are really trying to do this, that they'd like to continue after week 6, and more of a discussion class than what we're doing right now. I mean, this is more lecture. And so more of a discussion class, almost like a small group. Matthew told me Monday the elders were good with it. Is that correct? Is that correct? And so,
Okay.
here's what I don't know. I don't know if I planned on that or not. What it would be like, and I want you to think about it before next week. What it would be like is not like this. I wouldn't be preparing anything. We literally, I think, would walk in and like have tables set up like in a circle, kind of, or something like that. I mean, I'd be sitting down and we would just discuss questions that people have as they're trying out this process. I know that's not the normal Sunday morning. You know, we do that at other times, so that's why I was like, Matthew, you need to talk to the elders to see. And I know that wouldn't be for everyone. So what I would want you to do is think about, is that something you would be interested and would do? Because I also don't want to tell the elders we're going to do it and then nobody come. And so think about that as we go through this week. Evaluate that, if that would be something that you would do, you think would be helpful. And we don't have to do it for 6 weeks. If it's 1 or 2 weeks and everybody's good, or I mean, whatever. You know, I would be open to it, but again, it wouldn't be preparation like this. It would be just more discussion, a lot more discussion. And with that, next week, I will say, after we go through, I think next week, Ray always ends us every week with, boy, you're making my brain work, or whatever he says to us. Then next week, I really think I'm going to make your brain work, like Ray says, because I'm going to talk about what are you going to do now? I'm going to challenge you even more. What are you going to do now? Are you going to be like the dog that goes back to its own vomit, or are you not? Or are you not? And so I'm going to give you some ways to take this forward, and that kind of thing. And so I was going to start it actually next week with, I want your questions next week. Does that make sense? I was going to start that anyway. And maybe we get them all, and there's no need to continue that next week. I don't know. But I do say bring your questions that you have. And I know, Jimmy, you had a question last week that I told you that I feel like we would somewhat answer. Did we somewhat answer your question?
Somewhat.
Okay. Remind me what your question exactly was.
As an elder, am I doing, essentially, as an elder, am I doing it to some extent? You know, am I doing what God's role is, or am I doing what I want to do?
Yeah. Here's what I'm going to say that's going to make some of you uncomfortable, but I am going to say it anyway, because as I've gone through this process, it's what I've learned is a truth realization for me. Maybe it's not for you. Because this does make us Church of Christ people a little uncomfortable, but I am going to say it anyway. Sometimes you have to feel the answer. Know the scripture, study the scripture, dive into the scripture, and then quit thinking. Because when you're thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking, you're seeing it through previous conditioning, and you're seeing it through your own lens of worthiness and unworthiness and all that, and you just aren't. That's where your head exists. At some point, you study and expound yourself with the scripture, and then you just feel the answer from within, from below, not down, top down, bottom up. And you will get more comfortable at that as you do this process, because to be honest with you, God is truth, and nothing else for sure is. And so because of that, there's times where you have to feel it, and you have to quit thinking about it. So for instance, 12 years ago, when I had to make a decision, I mean, it was list, and examining and research and investigation, and that was it. It was all in my head. Fast forward to 12 years now, I do the investigation. That is a fact. I'm going to know everything about the subject, and then I stop. And I just try to feel, what do I know? What's God telling me? What do I feel? And I know that may make some of you uncomfortable, I don't know that's the answer you want, but I think you have to get to a certain point where you just trust God. God's either in control or he's not. All right, that's class, y'all. See you next week.